Joined by Jennifer Sanders, who is the Executive Director at the Dallas Innovation Alliance. Jennifer, welcome. Thanks for making the time to be here. Before we start, can you give us a little bit about what the Dallas Innovation Alliance does, what you do, just to give some context for your answers for the rest of the interview?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So the Dallas Innovation Alliance is a freestanding nonprofit public-private partnership. Its mission is to design and execute a smart city strategy for the city of Dallas and really beyond. There's really more of there's a regional perspective to that as well. So we are a network of 30 partner organizations which span the civic, in terms of the Dallas Regional Chamber of Commerce, our transit agency, Convention and Visitors Bureau, alongside the private sector as well as the academic sector. So regional research universities are also critical partners of ours.
And so you're the second person I've interviewed who comes from a sort of not-profit entity to try and pull the smart city initiatives together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So I find it interesting that this seems to be happening more and more often. I mean, how important do you think it is to have this almost agnostic entity at the heart of the initiative? I mean, do you think it's vital? So if other cities are watching this and like going, hang on a minute, really do this because it helps X, Y, and Z?
I certainly think based on the number of calls I get from other cities that it's a model that is looked at to replicate, and I think it's critical. I may be a bit biased, but our ability to act as an independent third-party body to advise the city and really look at how do we build this, combined with the ability to act autonomously and move far more quickly than an internal city department could. And the city is building an internal team dedicated to this strategy as well, but at the inset to move quickly, we really felt like being free of the burden of procurement and being able to go ahead and get lessons learned quickly is a critical piece to the success thus far of our initiatives.
And let's dive into those initiatives as well, because it's one of those things where you say smart city, and it's a big, huge topic. It's massive. It can be transport, it can be water, it can be I don't know, citizen health or whatever it is. With the work you're doing in Dallas, where are the sort of start use cases? Because thinking of the whole thing is a bit mind-blowing.
Mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It can get overwhelming really quickly, and I think a lot of cities get very concerned and overwhelmed by that and try to boil the ocean. So we knew we needed to take a multi-phase strategy, to your point. So our initial phase, our pilot project, is called the Living Lab. It's in a district in downtown Dallas. And the idea and the differentiator, we think, is that we're putting in 7 or 8 different projects in the same compressed geographic area. So we can really understand what the value is, not just within an individual project like energy efficiency, but really how can we utilize the data across projects to really maximize the value and insight that these initiatives can bring.
So in your mind, the biggest value, the biggest outcome lies in the data and the value over the top. I mean, what else are you looking at doing with the data that comes out?
So I think what it really comes down to is being proactive and not reactive. And ultimately, the mayor has been really clear with us that he could care less about the shiny object if it's not making people's lives better. So I think the communication and the education of citizens also in terms of how can they utilize this data, how can they utilize these insights to improve their life day to day, whether it's traffic and congestion and mobility, to your point, or whether it's simply knowing that the city is looking for ways to save money that can be reinvested in other areas that are important to them. And
can you bring some of these things to life a little bit more about the sort of projects, so there's people watching can get a sense of where it is? Because the smart city, I mean, you used to call it digital cities. It's been around for a long time, and in the beginning it was a bunch of technology companies going, hey, you can put a sensor on a park bench without explaining why you'd even bother. So in terms of those projects that you've got, can you just pull 1 or 2 out and tell us a little bit about why you're bothering with those projects? What is the outcome, the value that those are creating?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the simplest one that you've probably heard a lot about is streetlights. And so the use case is threefold, really, in terms of testing out. One, conversion to LED, pretty clear-cut case of energy efficiency and cost savings. The intelligent network and communication and control system will save a lot of money for the city around truck rolls. So when repairs are needed, it tells them the light's out, it tells them what part is needed. Oftentimes, a city will roll a utility truck and it will be the wrong part because they didn't know what kind of pole it was. So the cost savings and the efficiency savings from a staff perspective is one key piece. The third thing that we really are excited about that light poles can do is encase other solutions. So that could be sensors, that could be small cells, which is a really critical and kind of politically charged issue with cities right now. So how can they find new ways to incorporate small cell licenses and technology without creating a Christmas tree effect on the light pole? And then the second one that I'll say that I think has a really interesting story around small business growth. You know, our pedestrian counters obviously have a lot of utilization around just understanding pedestrian traffic flow. Are we getting increased pedestrian traffic maybe as a result of some of the things that we're doing? But local businesses we're sharing that data with, and where there are some not intuitive times of day where they get a big spike in traffic. And so some of those businesses have changed and adjusted their happy hour pricing or times, for example, to capture more traffic. And the businesses that have shared data with us thus far have seen a 20% growth in revenue from February till now.
That's pretty good, because you know the small businesses,
the lifeblood
of economy. So are you then, you know, do you have a vision of going down the open data route? I know in London there's a big drive about open data and, you know, letting other people then innovate on this platform and create. Is that one of the things you're looking at?
Absolutely, and London's done a phenomenal job with their program, by the way, but Dallas has launched their open data portal in 2012, so there's already a fairly robust number of data sets. All of DIA's data is going to live on the open data portal, so it will have that level of transparency and access. A critical component of our organization is how we pull in the entrepreneurial community, so how can we allow startups to leverage the infrastructure we're putting in order to test their solutions, but the data is also obviously critical in terms of citizen access and early stage company access.
And I'm conscious of time, and you know I'm getting signals off stage that we're nearly there or thereabouts. But here's a question I have is, I am slowly starting to see some real traction and some real projects being put in play around smart cities, and so it's no longer some sort of concept that people are talking about. You're seeing real world use cases. So my question to you is, why now? I mean, what's happened that is making it possible? I mean, is it a technology tipping point? What do you think is going on?
I think that's a great question, and a couple of things kind of unique to Dallas and Texas is the enormous population growth. So I think there's been a catalyst around understanding, with the level of population influx we have, with aging infrastructure,
urbanization trends.
With the urbanization trends, there is just a critical need for us to start thinking differently and more innovatively around how we handle infrastructure and mobility particularly. So I think that provided a bit of a catalyst. I think you can't underestimate friendly competition as well. I think in Europe and parts of Asia have just tremendously outpaced the US, and so I think that element of they're seeing this value and this is why there's a huge driver, I think that can often catalyze as well.
And one of the other things is, I mean, you mentioned Europe and Asia. I'm not going to name specific regions, but you know, there seems to be a different mentality in terms of funding these grand projects and so on. You know, let's bring it back to our, you know, real Western world. You know, and you know how. And you mentioned public-private partnerships. I mean, how does the funding happen for these initiatives? You know, where should people go?
So the two things that we promised the city at the end of this pilot are, one, the full case study, but two, here are some examples of sustainable financial models that are not just going straight to a bond program, for example. And so what we're looking at and what we've seen some other cities start to do is look toward zero to very low CapEx around more of a private equity financing model for getting these large infrastructure projects done. So what we're seeing is a kind of a portfolio closed loop approach, obviously, where the additional revenue streams pay for these other projects, but these are not projects that are implemented within siloed department budgets. You're really saying, okay, public safety, you'll benefit from this piece of the light, so streets and lighting and public safety share this
So
cost.
it's this
It's the
cross-pollination.
Mm-hmm.
And does that go back to the fact that you guys are independent and you can then very quickly see those joins, whereas if people are in a department, they're just looking at their world?
they're resource strapped. So so going in and saying here's connecting the dots, here's the value to both, and getting everybody in the room together, to your point, has been critical in that education piece for the city.
And final question to you: if anybody's listening, if anybody's listening, people do listen to this stuff. What would you say is, are the 2 or 3 preferred business models in terms of funding things? Is it really that sort of PE model? Is that the one that's bubbling to the top, or are there others?
I think some are kind of traditional. What we've seen for a while, the performance-based contracts is one. I think the closed-loop portfolio approach, taking the private equity capital markets approach, is another. And then I think there is enough large federal grant projects that can be complemented and leveraged through matching through a PPP model, a more traditional PPP model.
Perfect. And on that note, we will leave it because we are now at the end of our time. Jennifer, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us. And thank you as well for watching.